They thought firing me would simplify everything, that my complex models were holding them back from their $100 million dreams. But when their precious deal went up in flames and every single investor turned their backs, they finally understood the truth. I was the only complicated thing standing between their empire and complete collapse. And now, from the ashes of their ambition, they'd learned that some things you dismiss as too complex are actually the very foundations keeping you alive. My name is Claire Morgan, and I've spent 12 years turning financial chaos into predictable patterns. That Tuesday morning in the Allstone Analytics boardroom, I was about to learn that competence can be a career death sentence. The mahogany table reflected the faces of 8 executives, their expressions ranging from bored to openly hostile as I clicked through slide 37 of my risk assessment framework. My 90-page document lay before each of them. Tabs color-coded, margins filled with annotations I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. As you can see in section 4.2, I said, pointing to the stress test scenarios on the screen, we need to account for a minimum of 12 market volatility patterns before we can confidently present this to Ridgeway Capital. The legal provisions alone require... Jesus Christ, Claire! Derek Vaughn's voice cut through my presentation like a buzzsaw through tissue paper. Our new CFO leaned back in his Italian leather chair, his Patek Philippe catching the morning light as he gestured dismissively. Are we preparing a financial model or writing a doctoral thesis? Nervous laughter rippled around the table. I recognized the sound, the anxious harmony of people who knew they should understand what I was presenting but didn't want to admit it. Derek stood up, his Tom Ford suit impeccable, his understanding of risk modeling non-existent. He'd been here 3 months, recruited from some tech startup where he'd apparently revolutionized their financial reporting. What that meant, I'd learned, was turning complex realities into digestible lies. Let me show you something, he said, pulling up his own presentation on his laptop. 3 slides, 3 colorful pie charts, smiling stock photos, bullet points that could have been written by a marketing intern. This is what investors want to see. Confidence. Vision. Not... He waved at my document. A technical manual for robots. Derek, these aren't arbitrary complexities. I kept my voice steady, professional. These are regulatory requirements. The stress test models protect both us and our investors from making money? He grinned, and several executives chuckled. Sarah from marketing actually applauded softly. Look, I get it. You're thorough. But we're not trying to land a NASA contract here. We're selling confidence. I watched him delete entire sections from my presentation in real time. His cursor, a digital eraser, wiping away months of carefully constructed safeguards. The legal provisions, gone. The historical data analysis, deleted. The scenario planning that could prevent catastrophic losses, reduced to a single optimistic projection. There, he said, satisfied. Clean, simple, sellable. The room erupted in approval. Even Margaret, who'd been with the company since its founding, nodded enthusiastically. Finally, something we can actually present without putting everyone to sleep, she said, not meeting my eyes. I stood there, my laser pointer still in hand, watching my work get butchered into something unrecognizable. But it wasn't the destruction that chilled me. It was the eager acceptance of it. These people, who'd relied on my models for years, who'd seen my predictions save us from 3 market downturns, were ready to throw it all away for prettier PowerPoints. Claire! Derek's voice dripped with false concern. You look upset. I know change is hard, but sometimes we need to evolve past unnecessary complexity. I gathered my papers slowly, deliberately. Every face in that room avoided mine except Derek's. He was enjoying this. I realized this wasn't about the model at all. This was about establishing dominance, about showing everyone that the new CFO could override the veteran analyst who'd been here since the company had 12 employees and a prayer. Of course, I said finally, my voice calm as a frozen lake. Evolution, I understand completely. As I left the boardroom, I heard the celebration continue behind me. They were toasting Derek's vision, his fresh perspective. Not one of them asked what would happen when Ridgway's due diligence team looked for the risk assessments. Not one wondered about the legal ramifications of removing the compliance frameworks. But I knew. And more importantly, I knew something they didn't. Every model, every algorithm, every piece of analytical framework that made Allstone Analytics worth $100 million existed on my personal LLC's servers, developed on my own time, merely licensed to the company through a contract they'd clearly never read carefully. They thought they were simplifying things. They were about to learn just how complex their situation was about to become. The next morning arrived with Seattle's typical gray drizzle, matching my mood as I entered the Allstone building at 6:47 a.m., well before the usual office crowd. I needed Derek to understand what he was about to destroy, needed to make one last attempt at preventing the catastrophe I could see approaching like a freight train in slow motion. His office door was open, the smell of his pretentious artisanal coffee wafting into the hallway. He was on a call, feet up on his desk, laughing at something. I waited until he noticed me and waved me in with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Claire, early bird, huh?" He ended his call and spun in his chair like a child. "Let me guess, you've been up all night worrying about my presentation?" I placed the investor contract on his desk, sticky notes marking the critical sections he'd deleted. "Derek, I need you to look at sections 7 through 12. Without these provisions, we're exposed to..." "Stop." He held up his hand like a traffic cop. "Just stop. You know what your problem is, Claire? You're stuck in 2010. This is how old-school firms operated, paralysis by analysis. But modern investors? They want agility, not encyclopedias. This isn't about being modern or old school. This is about fiduciary responsibility. When Ridgway asks for our stress test scenarios, they won't." He stood up, walked to his window overlooking the parking lot. "Because I'll be controlling the narrative. They'll see what I want them to see: growth potential, market optimization, synergistic opportunities. Buzzwords won't replace due diligence. Derek." He turned, and for the first time, I saw the real Derek beneath the polished exterior. His eyes were cold, calculating. "You know what? You're right. They won't replace it. But I will replace you if you keep pushing this doom and gloom narrative. Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check." He moved closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and suffocating. "Look, I'll spell it out for you. Claire, you're a spreadsheet junkie, a calculator with anxiety disorder. The board brought me in because they're tired of letting fear drive decisions. Your little risk models? They're fear, packaged in formulas." I wanted to laugh. Fear. My models had protected this company through the 2018 crypto crash, the pandemic volatility, the recent banking crisis, but I kept my expression neutral. "And when those fears materialize," I asked quietly, "when Ridgway's lawyers find the gaps, when the SEC starts asking questions about missing compliance documentation, then we adapt, we pivot, we don't sit paralyzed by what-ifs." He returned to his desk, dismissing me with his body language. "Besides, if something goes wrong, well, that's why companies have fall guys. Or in this case," he smirked, "fall girls who insisted on maintaining overly complex systems that nobody could understand." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. When this went wrong, and it would go wrong, they'd blame me. The architect of the overly complex models that Derek was now butchering. Even though I was warning against it, even though I was trying to prevent it, the narrative was already being written. Claire Morgan, the obtuse analyst who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. "I see," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "So I'm either silent and complicit, or vocal and scapegoated. Now you're learning." Derek's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Welcome to executive-level thinking. Claire, it's not about being right, it's about being on the winning side." I picked up the contract from his desk. He hadn't even looked at the marked sections. One last question, Derek. Have you actually read my original employment agreement, the one from when Allstone was just a startup? He laughed. Why would I read ancient history? No reason, I said, heading for the door. Just curious about your attention to detail. Claire, he called out as I reached the threshold. I'm going to give you some free advice. Update your resume. This industry's changing, and dinosaurs don't survive extinction events. I paused, not turning around. You're right about one thing. Derek, extinction events are coming, but you might want to check who's actually the dinosaur in this scenario. I left his office knowing two things with absolute certainty. First, Derek Vaughn was going to destroy everything I'd built to protect this company. Second, he had no idea that the intellectual property agreements from Allstone's startup days contained provisions that would make his simplification strategy the most expensive mistake of his career. As I walked back to my office, I passed the kitchen where junior analysts were preparing for their day, discussing Derek's revolutionary approach with enthusiasm. They had no idea they were celebrating the beginning of the end. But they'd learn soon enough that when you remove the complex safeguards keeping a system stable, collapse isn't just possible, it's inevitable. Thursday, 2:43 p.m. The call came through the desk phone. HR wanted to see me immediately. Not my cell, not email, but the desk phone, the corporate equivalent of a funeral bell. Jennifer from HR sat behind her desk with the kind of practice neutrality they must teach in HR certification courses. Beside her, a security guard I'd seen around but never spoken to stood like a monument to corporate paranoia. On the desk between us, a manila folder, a single sheet of paper, and a cardboard box that looked too small to hold 12 years of dedication. Claire, please sit, Jennifer said, her voice hitting that perfect pitch between professional and utterly devoid of humanity. I'm afraid we need to discuss some organizational changes. Restructuring, I said, not a question. Yes. She slid the paper across to me. Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated as part of our efficiency optimization initiative. Efficiency optimization. They'd weaponized corporate speak to make my execution sound like progress. Your severance package is outlined here, Jennifer continued, opening the manila folder. 2 weeks' pay, continuation of health benefits through the end of the month, and of course, we'll need you to sign this non-disclosure agreement. I picked up the NDA, scanning the dense legal text. Standard boilerplate about not discussing company operations, not disparaging the organization, not recruiting former colleagues. Nothing about intellectual property. They assumed the employment contract covered that. Derek's arrogance was infectious. Apparently, I'll need time to review this with my attorney, I said. Jennifer's eye twitched, the first crack in her HR armor. I'm afraid the severance package is contingent on signing today. It's standard procedure. Then I declined the severance. The security guard shifted slightly. Jennifer's mask slipped completely. Claire, be reasonable. 2 weeks' pay is worth less than my integrity. I stood up. I assume you'll want to escort me to my desk. The walk through the office felt like a reverse perp walk. Conversations died as we passed. Some colleagues looked away. Shame or fear, I couldn't tell. Others watched with the morbid fascination of drivers passing a highway accident. Derek's assistant actually smirked. My desk was exactly as I'd left it that morning. Coffee cup still half full. PostgreSQL query still blinking on one monitor. The security guard handed me the cardboard box while Jennifer watched me like I might steal the stapler. I packed slowly, deliberately. The photo of my team from the 2019 company retreat, when we were still small enough to know everyone's name. My coffee mug. The one with world's okayest analyst that the junior team had given me last Christmas. A stress ball shaped like a brain that I'd never actually used but kept for the irony. What I didn't pack, any USB drives, any printed models, any documentation. Jennifer noticed. Don't you have personal files to collect? She asked, suspicious. Everything I created for Allstone belongs to Allstone, I said, which was true enough. What I created for my LLC, however, was a different story. I'm not Derek. I don't take things that aren't mine. If Jennifer caught the barb, she didn't react. The security guard looked bored. As I placed my access badge on the desk, I noticed my login was still active on the computer. Should I log out? It will handle it, Jennifer said quickly, too quickly. They wanted to go through my files, probably looking for evidence of what? Sabotage? Theft? They'd find nothing but meticulously organized folders and query histories that would take them months to understand. The elevator ride down felt endless. 23 floors of silence except for the mechanical hum and Jennifer's nervous breathing. The security guard stared at the numbers like they held the meaning of life. In the lobby, Jennifer finally spoke. Claire, for what it's worth, this wasn't personal. The company is moving in a new direction. Jennifer, I interrupted, adjusting the box in my arms. In 6 months, when the Ridgeway deal implodes and the SEC starts investigating, when Derek's simplified models can't answer basic compliance questions, when the board realizes they fired the only person who understood the actual mechanics of our risk assessment, remember this moment. Remember that you had the chance to ask questions, to push back, to think beyond the script they gave you. Her face went pale. Is that a threat? No, I said, pushing through the revolving door into the Seattle drizzle. It's a prediction, based on a very complex model that's apparently too complicated for Allstone Analytics to understand anymore. The rain felt appropriate, cinematic, even. But as I walked to my car, box getting soggy, career apparently over, I didn't feel defeated. I felt something else entirely. The cold, perfect clarity of someone who knows exactly what's about to happen next. They'd fired me without cause. Triggered Clause 9.4.2 of my original contract. And handed me complete ownership of the intellectual property that made their company valuable. They just didn't know it yet. The security guard watched from the lobby windows as I drove away. I wondered if he'd remember this moment when the news broke, when the investigation started, when everyone asked how a 12-year veteran could vanish with the keys to the kingdom. But by then, it would be far too late for anyone to do anything about it. The Pike Place Market coffee shop hadn't changed since law school. Same worn wooden tables, same impossible-to-find bathroom, same barista who'd seen too much to care about anything. Samantha Price sat in our old corner booth, her power suit as sharp as her legal mind. 2 laptops already open and a legal pad filled with her distinctive angular handwriting. You look remarkably calm for someone who just got canned, she said, sliding a cortado across to me. That's because I'm not unemployed. Sam, I'm about to become Allstone's worst nightmare. I pulled out the USB drive I'd been carrying for 3 days, ever since Derek's boardroom coup. Everything's on here, every model, every algorithm, every piece of analytical framework that makes Allstone worth anything to investors. Sam's eyebrows rose. Claire, if you copied company property, I didn't copy anything. I opened my laptop, pulling up documents I'd saved years ago. This is all mine, created on my personal equipment, on my own time, using my LLC's resources. Allstone just had a license to use it. Based on what? I handed her a folder I'd kept in my home safe for 5 years. My original employment contract. Back when Allstone was 6 people in a WeWork space, desperate for someone who could build legitimate financial models. Sam put on her reading glasses, her courtroom glasses, she called them. I watched her expression shift from skepticism to interest, to something approaching predatory glee. Clause 9.4.2, she read aloud. In the event of termination without cause, any intellectual property developed by the employee outside of company infrastructure and licensed to the company under supplementary agreement shall revert to full employee ownership, with all usage rights by the company terminated immediately. Keep reading. Supplementary Agreement A details the licensing structure. Her voice trailed off as she absorbed the implications. Claire, this says you've been licensing your models to them on a month-to-month basis, renewable only with continuous employment. which ended at 2:43 p.m. yesterday. Sam leaned back, a smile spreading across her face that I hadn't seen since she decimated opposing counsel in our mock trial finals. They fired you without cause? Organizational restructuring. I have the termination letter. Did they offer severance? Contingent on signing an NDA. I declined. Beautiful. She pulled up a legal database on one laptop while opening a document template on the other. So as of yesterday afternoon, Allstone Analytics has been using proprietary software they no longer have rights to. Every analysis, every projection, every report they generate for Ridgeway Capital is technically intellectual property theft. I finished. And here's the best part. I registered everything with the Copyright Office 2 years ago, just in case. Sam's fingers flew across the keyboard. We need to move fast. Once they realize what's happened, they won't. Derek deleted all the documentation requirements from the investor presentation. He has no idea the models even have external dependencies. Jennifer from HR was more concerned about me stealing office supplies than understanding what I actually owned. Their legal team reports to Derek now. He restructured that too. Said legal was too conservative for his vision. I pulled up Allstone's recent SEC filings on my laptop. Look at this. They're presenting my risk models as core company assets in their valuation documents. Sam whistled low. That's securities fraud if they can't actually use them. Only if they knowingly misrepresent. Right now, they're just catastrophically ignorant. She started drafting on her legal pad, her handwriting becoming increasingly aggressive. We send a cease and desist letter tomorrow morning. No. Wait. Monday morning, after they've had the weekend to dig themselves deeper. We detail your ownership, demand immediate cessation of use, and... She looked up, eyes sparkling. We offer to license it back to them. For how much? Oh, Claire. Sweet, brilliant Claire. We don't name a price. We let them sweat through the weekend, realize their $100 million deal depends on software they can't use, then watch them come begging. I shook my head. I don't want their money. Sam. Then what do you want? I thought about Derek's smirk, Jennifer's cold efficiency, the board members who'd laughed at my complexity while building their futures on it. I want them to understand that some things can't be simplified, that when you fire the person who builds your foundations, you better make sure you actually own the ground you're standing on. Sam closed her legal pad with a satisfying snap. Then we don't offer to license it back at all. We just inform them they're in violation and let them figure out the implications themselves. Can they claim I developed it on company time? They'd have to prove it, and based on these timestamps, she scrolled through the metadata I'd meticulously preserved. Everything was created either before your employment or during documented personal time. You even have LLC invoices for the computing resources. The coffee shop's ambient noise faded as the magnitude of what we were about to do settled in. Allstone Analytics, the company I'd helped build, was about to discover that their new simplified approach had overlooked one complex detail. Me. Send the letter Monday at 9 a.m., I said, right when they're preparing for their final Ridgeway presentation. Sam raised her cortado in a toast. To complexity. To consequences, I corrected, clinking my cup against hers. Monday, 9:03 a.m. I sat in my apartment, watching my phone light up with notifications from former colleagues still connected on LinkedIn. The digital wildfire had started. Sam had crafted a masterpiece of legal precision, sending the cease and desist letter not just to Derek, but to every board member, the legal department, and, with surgical precision, CCing the compliance officer who'd been marginalized in Derek's restructuring. My phone buzzed. Marcus from IT. Holy shit, Claire. The entire C-suite is in the main conference room. Derek looks like he's having a stroke. Then another. From Sarah in marketing. Legal just locked down all external communications. What did you do? I didn't respond. I just pulled up Allstone's internal Slack through a browser window. My credentials, mysteriously, still active. IT incompetence or someone's quiet rebellion. I didn't know and didn't care. The Northern General channel was chaos. Anyone know why all the modeling software is showing license warnings? Legal just asked for every document related to risk assessment frameworks. Why is Ridgeway Capital calling emergency meetings? Derek just threw his laptop across the boardroom, not joking. The phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the conference room extension. Claire. Derek's voice had lost all its polish. We need to talk. We're talking. This is extortion. This is contract law. I recommend you consult your legal team. Oh, wait. Didn't you say lawyers were too conservative for your vision? Muffled voices in the background. Someone, sounded like Margaret from the board, hissing something about due diligence and disclosure requirements. Derek came back on, trying to salvage some authority. Look, there's been a misunderstanding. Your termination was premature. We can work something out. Reinstatement, a promotion, maybe a board advisory position. I'm not interested in positions, Derek. Then what do you want? Money? Equity? Name your price. I want you to explain to Ridgeway Capital how you're going to deliver risk assessments without risk assessment models. I want you to tell the SEC why your financial projections are based on software you don't own. I want you to stand in front of the board and admit that your simplification strategy just complicated everything beyond repair. You vindictive little... Another voice cut him off. Carolyn from legal had taken the phone. Ms. Morgan, this is Carolyn Winters. I'm reviewing your original employment contract now. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss licensing terms? Carolyn, you're competent, so I'll be straight with you. Check the timestamp on when Derek terminated my employment, then check when your Ridgeway presentation is scheduled. Then calculate how long it would take to rebuild 12 years of proprietary models from scratch. Silence. I could practically hear her doing the math. The presentation is tomorrow, she said quietly. Yes, it is. We could seek an injunction. On what grounds? That you fired me without reading my contract? That you assumed you owned something you were only licensing? That your new CFO was too arrogant to understand complexity has value? More muffled conversation. Raised voices, something that sounded like, should have reviewed, and catastrophic oversight. Derek grabbed the phone back. This is corporate sabotage. You planned this. No, Derek. I planned for contingencies. I built complex safeguards. I documented everything meticulously. You know, all those things you said were unnecessary. I pulled up the email he'd sent 2 weeks ago, the one where he'd written that my obsessive documentation was holding the company back. I believe you called it paralysis by analysis. The board won't let you destroy this company. I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply taking my property with me. You destroyed the company when you decided expertise was less valuable than PowerPoint skills. A new voice came on the line. Richard Blackstone, chairman of the board. Claire, Richard here. Let's discuss this professionally. What would it take for a temporary license extension? Just through the Ridgeway presentation? Richard, with respect, you sat in that boardroom and laughed when Derek called me a spreadsheet junkie with an anxiety disorder. You nodded along when he deleted the legal provisions. You signed off on my termination without asking a single question about the intellectual property implications. That was, we were trusting leadership to handle operational decisions. And how's that working out for you? I heard a door slam. Derek had left the room. Good. Richard's voice dropped, becoming more genuine. Claire, we made a mistake. I made a mistake. But destroying the Ridgeway deal won't undo what happened. You're right, it won't. But it will teach you something important. When you build your house on someone else's foundation, you better make sure you own the land. The investors will ask why you didn't do proper due diligence, why your new CFO didn't understand the company's basic legal structure, why you fired the person who built your core assets without understanding what she actually owned. This will destroy Derek's career. Derek destroyed his own career when he confused confidence with competence. Another long silence. Then Richard said the words I'd been waiting to hear. We need those models. Claire. Yes, I agreed. You do. Will you license them back to us? No. Then we're finished. That was your choice, Richard. You had something complex and valuable, and you decided to simplify it. Turns out, some things are complex for a reason. I hung up and turned back to my laptop. The Slack channel had gone quiet, probably locked down by legal. But I knew what was happening in that boardroom. Panic, blame, desperate scrambling for solutions that didn't exist. By tomorrow morning, Ridgeway Capital would be asking questions Allstone couldn't answer. By tomorrow afternoon, the deal would be dead. All because they thought complexity was the enemy, when really, it was the only thing keeping them alive. Tuesday, 4:47 p.m. The news broke on FinTech Weekly first. Ridgeway Capital pulls $100 investment from Allstone Analytics, citing material misrepresentations in risk assessment capabilities. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since lunch. Reporters, headhunters, former colleagues. Everyone wanted to know what happened. I ignored them all, except for one text from Marcus in IT. Slack is melting down. Derek just got escorted out by security. Board meeting at 6. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop to watch the public implosion. Allstone's stock price had dropped 12% in 3 hours. The investor relations team had issued a stammering press release about temporary restructuring of strategic partnerships that fooled nobody. Then came the call I'd been expecting. Not Derek. He was probably consulting with his own lawyers by now. Not Richard. He was likely explaining to shareholders how he'd let this happen. It was Ridgeway Capital's senior partner, Elizabeth Hartley. Ms. Morgan, I believe we should talk. Ms. Hartley, I wondered when you'd call. We've just finished our emergency review of Allstone's presentation materials. Or rather, we tried to. It seems their risk models have disappeared. Not disappeared. They never owned them. A thoughtful pause. I've reviewed the cease and desist letter your attorney sent. Fascinating reading. 12 years of proprietary development, all personally owned. All legally documented and registered? Yes, I can see that. Tell me, Ms. Morgan, are these models exclusive to Allstone's use case, or could they be adapted for other applications? I smiled. Elizabeth Hartley hadn't built Ridgeway Capital into a $3 billion fund by missing opportunities. They're entirely adaptable. In fact, they're more sophisticated than what most firms are using. I thought as much. We're having a partners meeting tomorrow. Would you be available for a consultation? We're particularly interested in firms that understand the value of complexity. I might be available, though I should mention, my consulting rates have recently increased. I imagine they have. Shall we say tomorrow at 10? Our offices? I'll consider it. After she hung up, I checked LinkedIn. 3 messages from board members at Allstone's competitors, 2 from international investment firms, 1 from the SEC, which I forwarded immediately to Sam. My phone rang again. This time it was someone unexpected, Margaret Chen, the board member who'd been with Allstone since the beginning. Claire, it's Margaret. I'm calling from my personal phone. Margaret. I wanted to apologize. I sat in that room and let Derek humiliate you. I knew your value, and I said nothing. You did more than nothing. You praised his approach. I know. Her voice cracked slightly. I was a coward. 20 years in business. And I still felt like I had to go along with the confident man in the expensive suit. I said nothing, letting her sit with that truth. The board is meeting in an hour, she continued. Derek's already gone, mutual separation agreement. Richard's probably next. The question is whether Allstone survives at all. That's not my problem anymore, Margaret. No, it's not. But I wanted you to know something. I'm going to propose that we publicly acknowledge what happened, that we admit we fired the person whose intellectual property we depended on, without understanding our own legal structure. That would be corporate suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only honest thing left to do. maybe admitting that we confuse simplicity with intelligence is the first step toward rebuilding with actual intelligence. Why are you telling me this? Because in about 2 hours, I'm going to recommend that Allstone offer to acquire your LLC for whatever price you name. Full autonomy, board seat, everything Derek had, and more. I stood up, walked to my window overlooking Elliott Bay. The sunset was turning the water gold. Margaret, even if I wanted that, which I don't, the other board members would never agree. They will if it's that or bankruptcy. Without your models, we can't fulfill our existing client contracts. We're not just losing Ridgeway, we're facing lawsuits from every fund that relied on our risk assessments. You should have thought about that before you let Derek throw my work in the trash. Yes, she said simply. We should have. I heard voices in her background. The board was gathering. I need to go, Margaret said. But Claire? When this is over, when Allstone either rebuilds or burns, I hope you know that some of us learned something. That complexity isn't the enemy. Ignorance is. She hung up. I sat back down, watching the last investors flee Allstone's sinking stock. My phone showed 17 missed calls from recruiters, 3 from journalists, and 1 from my mother, who'd somehow already heard the news. But I didn't return any of them. Instead, I opened a new document and started sketching out plans for my own firm. One that would understand that in finance, as in life, the most dangerous phrase isn't "it's too complicated," it's "let's keep it simple." Wednesday, 8:15 p.m. The emergency board meeting had stretched into its 14th hour. I knew this because Margaret had been texting me updates, despite what I assumed were explicit instructions not to communicate with me. Derek trying to claim fraud, board's not buying it. Legal confirms you own everything. Carolyn looks sick. Richard just offered his resignation. Board voted to table it pending resolution. Then, at 8:47 p.m. They want to meet with you. Tonight? Name your terms. I was in Sam's office, having anticipated this moment. She'd ordered Thai food and cleared her schedule, sensing blood in the water like the apex predator she was in legal situations. They're desperate, she said, reviewing the formal meeting request that had just come through. Caroline's attached a preliminary valuation of your IP at $47 million. That's insulting. That's their opening. The real number is probably twice that, especially considering the consequential damages they're facing. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number with a screenshot. Derek's LinkedIn profile had been deleted. The king of confidence had been dethroned in less than 48 hours. So what do you want to do? Sam asked. We could demand a fortune. We could demand control. We could demand Derek's head on a platter, though it seems that's already been delivered. I looked at the formal request again. The same boardroom where I'd been humiliated. The same executives who'd laughed at complexity. They wanted me to come save them, in the very space where they decided I was disposable. Set the meeting for 10 p.m., I said. Their boardroom? Claire, you don't have to go back there. We can make them come to us. No. I want them to sit in those same chairs, at that same mahogany table, and realize what they destroyed. Sam smiled her shark smile. And your terms? I don't want their money. I don't want a position. I want something else entirely. At 10 p.m. sharp, I walked into the Allstone Analytics boardroom. The contrast from 2 weeks ago was stark. No confident laughter, no dismissive smiles. Richard looked like he'd aged 5 years. Margaret sat with her hands folded, eyes downcast. 3 other board members I barely recognized sat in silence. Caroline from legal had a stack of documents that might as well have been surrender treaties. The chair where Derek had performed his simplification magic sat empty. Claire, Richard started, his voice hoarse. Thank you for coming. I sat down in the same spot where I'd stood presenting my 90-page risk assessment, where Derek had called me a robot, where my 12 years of work had been dismissed as unnecessary complexity. Before we begin, Caroline interjected, we need to acknowledge that Allstone Analytics gravely misunderstood the intellectual property arrangements. Your ownership is clear and undisputed. I know. Richard cleared his throat. We're prepared to offer you a complete acquisition of your LLC, 47 million initial, with performance bonuses that could double that. No. 60 million. No. Then what do you want? His composure finally cracked. We're facing complete collapse. Ridgeway's gone. 3 other major investors are pulling out. The SEC is opening an investigation. Without your models, we're finished. I pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the mahogany table. My terms are simple. I'll license the models back to you for $1. Stunned silence, Margaret looked up for the first time. $1? Richard repeated. What's the catch? 3 conditions. First, Derek's entire simplification initiative is reversed. Every safeguard, every complexity, every unnecessary detail gets restored. Done, Richard said immediately. Second, a public statement acknowledging that Allstone's value was built on complex intellectual property it didn't own and didn't understand. Full transparency about what happened. Carolyn winced. That could open us to lawsuits. You're already open to lawsuits. At least this way. You're open to them with integrity. Richard nodded slowly. And the third? Every employee Derek marked for redundancy in his efficiency plan gets offered their job back, with a 20% raise and a written apology. Claire. Margaret spoke for the first time. That's corporate suicide. Admitting this publicly will destroy our reputation. Your reputation is already destroyed. Ridgeway made sure of that when they cited material misrepresentations. The question is whether you rebuild on honesty or deeper lies. Why? Richard asked. Why these terms? You could bankrupt us. You could take everything. I stood up, walked to the window where Derek had stood 2 weeks ago, dismissing my concerns with his view of the parking lot. Because I don't want your money. I want something you can't buy back. The knowledge that complexity has value, that the people who build your foundations matter, that when you simplify something you don't understand, you might be destroying the very thing that makes it work. And if we refuse, I turned back to face them. Then I'll license my models to Ridgeway directly. They've already called. Twice. The board exchanged glances. The vote was unanimous. As Carolyn prepared the emergency licensing agreement, Richard approached me. You planned this. From the moment Derek dismissed your work. No, I said. I planned this from the moment I signed my original contract 12 years ago. I just never thought I'd have to use it. 3 months later. I sat on my apartment balcony, a glass of Malbec in hand, watching Seattle's evening rain paint patterns on the city below. The financial press had finally moved on from the Allstone Analytics story, though it had become required reading in business schools as the $100 million oversight. Derek Vaughn had disappeared from the corporate world entirely. Last I heard, he was teaching leadership communication at a community college in Montana. The irony wasn't lost on me, the man who couldn't communicate the value of complexity now teaching others how to communicate. Allstone survived, barely. Their public admission had triggered 17 lawsuits, but it also earned them something unexpected: respect for transparency. Margaret was now CEO, having learned the hard way that going along with confident incompetence was more dangerous than standing up to it. They'd rehired every employee Derek had marked for termination, and their new marketing slogan was almost painfully honest: complex solutions for complex problems. The Ridgeway deal never happened. Not with Allstone, anyway. Elizabeth Hartley had hired my new consulting firm instead, paying 3 times what Allstone would have received. She understood something Derek never could. In finance, simplicity is often just complexity you don't understand yet. My phone buzzed. Sam, sending me a screenshot of Allstone's latest quarterly report. They'd survived the quarter, posted modest profits, and included a line item I'd never seen in a corporate report before: intellectual property licensing, critical infrastructure. $1.0 $1. The most expensive dollar in corporate history. Some had called it, but it wasn't about the money. It never was. I thought about that boardroom, about Derek's smirk when he'd called my work unnecessary complexity, about the board members who'd laughed along, who'd chosen confidence over competence, about Jennifer from HR, executing terminations without understanding what was being terminated. They'd all learned the same lesson, eventually. When you build your empire on someone else's foundation, you'd better understand what's holding it up. Because the moment you decide it's too complex, too detailed, too careful, that's the moment you've signed your own corporate death warrant. The rain intensified, and I went inside, closing the balcony door on the Seattle skyline. Tomorrow. I had meetings with 3 Fortune 500 companies, all suddenly interested in comprehensive risk modeling and detailed compliance frameworks. Derek's legacy, in a way, every company in America now checking their employment contracts, their IP agreements, their licensing structures. But tonight, I simply sat in my living room, in the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd been told they were too complex for the modern world, and proved that the modern world was too simple for reality. I raised my glass to the empty room, to fired employees everywhere who'd been told they didn't fit the new vision, who'd been simplified out of existence by executives who confused PowerPoints with power. Here's to complexity, I said to no one in particular. And to the people smart enough to value it. The wine was good. The silence was better. And somewhere in Seattle, in a boardroom that had once echoed with dismissive laughter, executives were learning to read the fine print, to value the details, to respect the complexity they'd once mocked. Justice doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it comes with a $1 licensing fee and the knowledge that those who tried to destroy you are now paying, not in money, but in the currency that matters most in business, humility. They thought firing me would simplify their lives. Instead, it gave them the most complex lesson of all, that some things are complicated because they need to be. And when you eliminate the people who understand that complexity, you don't get simplicity, you get chaos. And chaos, as Derek Vaughan learned, doesn't care how confident you are, how expensive your suit is, or how colorful your PowerPoints are. It only cares about one thing, the truth you tried to simplify away. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate justice. I'm curious, where are you listening to this tale of office revenge? Are you on your commute, perhaps thinking about your own Derek? Or maybe you're at home, remembering a time when your expertise was dismissed as too complex? Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world this story has reached you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of workplace justice, and share your own thoughts. Have you ever seen complexity dismissed, only to watch everything fall apart? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below.